Victoria Van Ness pressed her handkerchief to her mouth, fighting the nausea that came with each lurch of the stagecoach as it rattled toward Redding, California, in the scorching August heat of 1878. Beside her, 5-year-old Emma whimpered softly, and on her other side, 7-year-old Thomas tried so hard to be brave despite the tears streaking his dusty face. These were not her children, though anyone seeing them together might think so. They were her sister Margaret's children, and Margaret was dead now, buried in a Philadelphia cemetery 2 months past, taken by the fever that had swept through their neighborhood like an angry spirit. Victoria had made a promise to Margaret in those final fevered hours, holding her sister's burning hand while the children waited outside the quarantined room. She had sworn she would care for Emma and Thomas as if they were her own, that she would give them a home and a future, no matter what that required of her. What it had required was answering an advertisement in the newspaper, corresponding with a rancher named Matthew Forrester in California, who sought a wife, and boarding a train westward with 2 grieving children and 3 trunks containing everything they owned in the world. The letter she had written to Matthew had been honest, perhaps too honest. She had told him about Emma and Thomas, explained that they came as part of the arrangement, that she could not and would not leave them behind. His response had taken 3 weeks to arrive, and she had worn the envelope thin with handling before finally opening it, terrified of rejection. But Matthew Forrester had written simply that any woman with such loyalty to family was the kind of woman he wanted on his ranch, and that he had room enough for children who needed a home. That had been 2 months ago. Now, as the stagecoach crested a hill and the driver called out that Redding lay just ahead, Victoria felt her heart hammering against her corset. She was 23 years old, had never been married, had spent her adult life working as a seamstress in Philadelphia to help support Margaret and the children after Margaret's husband had died in a factory accident. She knew nothing about ranching, about California, about this man who had agreed to marry her. She knew only that she had made a promise, and that Matthew Forrester represented the only path forward she could see. "Is that it?" Thomas asked, pressing his face to the window. "Is that where we are going to live?" Victoria looked out at the town taking shape below them. Redding sat in a valley, surrounded by mountains that looked purple in the distance. The Sacramento River glinted like a silver ribbon in the afternoon sun. The town itself appeared small but purposeful, with wooden buildings lining a main street, and beyond it, she could see scattered ranches and farmland spreading across the valley floor. "That is Redding," she said, smoothing Emma's hair back from her damp forehead. "And somewhere near here is the ranch where we will make our new home." "Will the man be nice?" Emma asked in a small voice. She had asked this question perhaps 100 times during their journey, and Victoria gave her the same answer she always did. "I believe he will be. And if he is not, then we will manage together, the 3 of us, just as we have managed everything else." The stagecoach rolled down the hillside and into town, pulling up before a building with a sign that read Redding Stage Depot. Dust billowed around them as the driver climbed down and began untying luggage from the roof. Victoria took a deep breath, adjusted her bonnet, and opened the door. The heat hit her like a physical force. Philadelphia had been hot in August, but this California heat was different, dry and intense, making her dress feel like a woolen prison. She helped Emma down first, then Thomas, and stood on the wooden sidewalk looking around at the unfamiliar town while the driver hauled down their trunks. "Mrs. Van Ness," a voice said behind her, and she turned. The man standing there was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and sun-darkened skin that spoke of years working outdoors. He wore dusty ranch clothes, a wide-brimmed hat, and had eyes the color of the creek stones Victoria used to collect as a child, gray-blue and steady. His face was weathered but kind, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. He looked nervous, she realized with some surprise, as nervous as she felt. "Mr. Forrester?" she asked. "Matthew," he said, removing his hat. His hair was brown with streaks of sun-bleached lighter brown running through it. "And you must be Victoria." "I am." She gestured to the children pressed against her skirts. "This is Thomas and Emma." Matthew crouched down, bringing himself to the children's eye level. "Thomas, Emma, I am pleased to meet you both. I have been preparing for your arrival. The ranch has a creek running through it where the water is cool even in summer, and there is a barn cat who just had kittens. I thought perhaps you might like to see them." Thomas's eyes widened slightly, the first spark of interest Victoria had seen from him in weeks. Emma just buried her face further into Victoria's skirt. Matthew stood again, his expression understanding. "It is a lot of change all at once," he said, and Victoria could not tell if he was speaking to her or the children or himself. "The wagon is just there. The ranch is about 5 miles out. We should arrive before supper if we leave now." The ride to the ranch gave Victoria her first real look at California landscape. Everything was golden and dry, so different from the green of Pennsylvania. Oak trees dotted the hillsides, and in the distance, she could see cattle grazing. The sky seemed impossibly vast, stretching endlessly overhead in a blue so deep it almost hurt to look at. Matthew drove the wagon with easy competence, occasionally pointing out landmarks. "That is the Johnson Ranch to the east. Good people. They have a daughter about Thomas's age. The creek I mentioned runs along the western boundary of my property. The house is not large, but it is sturdy. I built it myself 5 years ago when I bought the land." "How many acres do you have?" Victoria asked, trying to make conversation despite her nervousness. 200. I run about 100 head of cattle, sell beef to the mining camps up north and to the army at Fort Reading. It is a good living, steady. The house has 3 bedrooms. I thought the children could share one and you could have the other." Victoria felt her cheeks warm and was grateful for the bonnet shading her face. She understood what he was not saying, that he would not expect to share her bed until she was ready, perhaps not until after they were properly married. "That is very considerate," she said quietly. "I wrote to Reverend Walsh in town. He can perform the ceremony whenever you are ready. Tomorrow or next week or next month. There is no rush from my perspective." She glanced at him, surprised by his patience. Most men, she thought, would want the marriage completed quickly to make the arrangement official and proper. But Matthew kept his eyes on the road ahead, his hands steady on the reins, giving her the space to breathe. "Perhaps we should wait a week," she said. "Let the children settle in. Let us all become acquainted properly. That seems wise." They crested a hill and Matthew pulled the wagon to a stop. "There," he said, pointing, "that is home." The ranch spread out below them in the valley. The house was indeed not large, a single-story wooden structure with a wide porch, but it looked solid and well-maintained. A barn stood nearby, painted red, and several smaller outbuildings dotted the property. Fences marked off pastures where cattle grazed, and she could see the glint of the creek Matthew had mentioned, lined with trees that provided the only real green in the landscape. "It is beautiful," Victoria said, and meant it. There was something honest about the place, something real and enduring. Matthew looked at her as though trying to determine if she meant it or was simply being polite. Whatever he saw in her face seemed to satisfy him because he nodded and clicked his tongue at the horses to start them moving again. The house was better inside than Victoria had dared hope. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace and sturdy furniture that Matthew had clearly made himself. The floors were clean, the windows had real glass, and though the space was simple, it was cared for. "I am not much of a cook," Matthew admitted as he carried their trunks inside. "I have been living mostly on beans and bacon and whatever vegetables I can manage not to kill in the garden. I am hoping you might be better at such things than I am." "I can cook," Victoria assured him. "My mother taught both Margaret and me before she passed." "Your parents are both gone then?" "Yes. My father died when I was 16, my mother 2 years later. It was just Margaret and me after that, and then she married Robert. When he died in the factory accident, she had the children to care for and no way to support them properly. I did what I could, but my seamstress wages were not enough for 2 households. And then she took sick." Victoria nodded, not trusting her voice. The grief was still too fresh, too raw. Matthew was quiet for a moment, then said, "My parents are gone too. My father died in the war, my mother of pneumonia the winter after. My brother went to San Francisco to seek his fortune, and I have not heard from him in 3 years, so I understand something of being alone in the world." It was the most he had said at one time since meeting them, and Victoria felt a small connection form, a thread of understanding between two people who had both known loss. That evening, Victoria cooked supper using the supplies Matthew had stocked, simple fare of fried salt pork, beans and cornbread, but more elaborate than what Matthew had been eating. The children sat quietly at the table, still overwhelmed by all the changes. Matthew made gentle attempts at conversation, asking Thomas about what he liked to do, telling Emma about the kittens in the barn, but neither child responded with more than 1 or 2 words. After supper, Victoria got the children ready for bed in the room Matthew had prepared for them. It held a wide bed with a sturdy frame and a colorful quilt, along with a small dresser and a washstand. As she tucked them in, Emma finally spoke more than a few words. "Do we have to stay here?" she whispered. "Yes, sweetheart, this is our home now, but I want Mama." Victoria felt tears sting her eyes. "I know, I want her too, but your Mama wanted you to be safe and cared for, and this is how I can do that for you. What if the man sends us away? He will not. I promise you, Emma, Mr. Forrester is a good man and he wants us here." She hoped she was right. She thought she was right, based on the day's interactions, but there was so much she did not know yet, so much that could still go wrong. When the children were finally asleep, Victoria returned to the main room to find Matthew sitting on the porch, looking out at the darkening landscape. She joined him, sitting in the other chair, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the California night. "They are hurting," Matthew said after a while, "losing their mother so recently. Yes, some days Emma cries for hours. Thomas tries to be strong, but he is only 7. Neither of them understands why this had to happen. And you, how are you managing?" The question surprised her. No one had asked her that, not since Margaret died. Everyone had been concerned with the children, as they should be, but no one had thought to ask how Victoria herself was bearing up under the weight of it all. "I am managing," she said, because it was the only answer she knew how to give. "I do what needs to be done." "That is not quite what I asked." Victoria was quiet, then said honestly, "I am tired and frightened, and I miss my sister terribly, but I made her a promise and I will keep it, no matter what that requires. Even marrying a stranger and moving across the country." "Even that?" Matthew nodded slowly. "I will try to make it as easy on you as I can. The marriage, the adjustment, all of it. I am not expecting romance or grand passion, Victoria. I am 30 years old. I have been running this ranch alone for 5 years, and I have learned that partnership and respect matter more than flowery sentiments. If we can build those things between us, I think we will manage well enough." It was a practical speech, realistic and somewhat unromantic, but Victoria found it comforting rather than disappointing. She had not expected love from this arrangement. She had hoped for safety and stability, for a home for the children. If Matthew Forrester could offer respect and partnership as well, that was more than she had dared dream. The first week passed in a blur of adjustment. Victoria learned the rhythms of the ranch, rising before dawn to cook breakfast, tending the vegetable garden, learning to preserve food for winter, managing the endless laundry that came with living in such a dusty climate. The work was harder than seamstressing had been, more physical and relentless, but there was something satisfying about it too, about seeing tangible results from her efforts. Matthew spent his days with the cattle, riding out early and returning at dusk, sun-darkened and exhausted. He was patient with the children, never pushing them to interact, but always leaving the door open for connection. He showed Thomas how to whittle, demonstrated the proper way to approach a horse, pointed out animal tracks along the creek. With Emma, he was gentler still, offering small kindnesses like wildflowers left on the porch or a special kitten picked out just for her. Slowly, gradually, the children began to thaw. Thomas started following Matthew to the barn in the mornings, watching as he saddled his horse, asking quiet questions about the ranch and the animals. Emma began to smile occasionally, especially when playing with the black and white kitten she had named Patches. On the 8th day after their arrival, Victoria told Matthew she was ready for the wedding. They rode into Reading that Saturday, all 4 of them in the wagon, dressed in their best clothes. Reverend Walsh performed the ceremony in the small church, with the Reverend's wife and the general store owner serving as witnesses. Victoria wore the blue dress she had made for the journey, and Matthew had on a clean shirt and vest, his hair still damp from washing. The ceremony was brief and simple. Victoria spoke her vows in a steady voice, promising to honor and keep Matthew Forrester, and he promised the same to her, his gray-blue eyes serious and intent. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Matthew leaned down and kissed her cheek gently, a chaste and respectful gesture that somehow felt more intimate than a passionate embrace might have. They had lunch at the hotel restaurant, a celebration meal of roast chicken and potatoes, with apple pie for the children. Emma chattered more than Victoria had heard her speak since Margaret's death, excited by the town and the restaurant and the small peppermint stick Matthew bought her from the general store. Thomas was quieter but smiled when Matthew asked his opinion on whether they should get a dog for the ranch. "A dog would be good," Thomas said seriously, "to help with the cattle and to warn if strangers come." "My thinking exactly," Matthew agreed. "I will ask around, see if anyone has a working dog they are willing to part with." On the ride home, Victoria's new wedding ring caught the sunlight, a simple gold band that Matthew had ordered specially from a jeweler in town. It felt strange on her finger, weighty and foreign, a physical reminder that her life had changed irrevocably. She was a married woman now, a wife and a mother to children not her own, living in a place she never could have imagined just months ago. That night, after the children were in bed, Matthew approached her in the kitchen where she was cleaning the supper dishes. "I know we are married now," he said, his voice low and somewhat uncertain, "but I meant what I said before. I will not rush you. Your room remains your own until you decide otherwise." Victoria set down the plate she was washing and turned to face him. He stood with his hat in his hands, this man who was now her husband, this stranger who had shown her nothing but kindness and patience since the moment they met. "You are a good man, Matthew Forrester," she said. "Better than I expected when I answered your advertisement." "You are more than I expected, too," he replied. "When you wrote about the children, I thought you would be desperate, willing to accept any arrangement just to have security for them. But you are not desperate. You are strong. You are doing what needs to be done, yes, but you are doing it with grace and courage." His words settled something inside her, some knot of anxiety she had been carrying. She smiled at him, a real smile, perhaps the first since Margaret's death. "Give me time," she said. "Not much time, I think. But some. All the time you need," Matthew promised. 2 weeks later, Victoria moved her belongings into Matthew's room. It was not a decision driven by passion or overwhelming emotion, but by a growing certainty that Matthew was someone she could trust, someone who would keep his promises just as she kept hers. He was gentle with her, patient, understanding that she was nervous. Their wedding night, delayed by mutual agreement, was tender rather than passionate, a beginning rather than a culmination. As autumn arrived and the fierce summer heat gradually eased, the ranch settled into a comfortable routine. Victoria had never been happier, she realized with some surprise. The work was hard, certainly, but it was purposeful. She was building something here, creating a home and a family from scattered pieces. Thomas flourished on the ranch, following Matthew everywhere, learning to ride and rope and care for the animals. The grief over his mother's death was still there. Victoria could see it in his eyes sometimes, but it was no longer the only thing defining him. He was a ranch boy now, growing brown and strong under the California sun, learning skills that would serve him well in life. Emma took longer to settle but slowly emerged from her shell of sorrow. She adopted not just Patches the kitten, but also a wounded bird that Matthew helped her nurse back to health, and a runt piglet from a neighboring farm that would have been culled if Emma had not pleaded so earnestly to save it. Matthew built her a small pen for the pig, whom she named Rosie, and pretended to grumble about having a pig as a pet while clearly charmed by Emma's devotion to the creature. Victoria watched Matthew with the children and felt something unfurling in her chest, something warm and tender that she had not expected. She had married him for practical reasons, to give Emma and Thomas a home and a future. But somewhere along the way, she had begun to care for him, to look forward to his return each evening, to value his opinions and seek his company. It was in October, with the oaks turning gold on the hillsides, that Victoria realized she had fallen in love with her husband. They were riding together along the creek, checking the fence line while the children were at the neighboring ranch playing with the Johnson children. It was a rare afternoon alone, and they had been talking easily about small things, about the cattle and the coming winter and whether they should plant more of the garden next spring. Matthew had dismounted to repair a section of fence, and Victoria watched him work, admiring the easy competence of his movements, the way his hands knew exactly what to do. When he finished and looked up to find her watching, he smiled, and something in that smile, so open and genuine and glad, pierced straight through to her heart. "What is it?" he asked, walking over to where she sat on her horse. "I was just thinking," she said, "about how fortunate I am. How fortunate we all are." "I am the fortunate one," Matthew said. "I have been thinking that every day since you arrived. I expected a practical arrangement, a business partnership. I never expected to find someone I genuinely enjoy spending time with, someone who makes this house feel like a true home." "Matthew," Victoria said, and then stopped, unsure how to put her feelings into words. He reached up and helped her dismount, his hand steady on her waist. When her feet touched the ground, he did not immediately step away, and neither did she. "Victoria," he said quietly. "I know we started this marriage as a practical matter, but I need you to know that it has become something more for me. Somewhere along the way, without quite meaning to, I fell in love with you." Her breath caught. She had not expected him to say it first, had not been certain he felt anything beyond contentment and respect. "I love you too," she whispered. "I did not expect to, but I do." When he kissed her this time, it was not the chaste peck from their wedding day, but something deeper, full of genuine feeling and promise. Victoria kissed him back, her arms going around his neck, feeling safe and cherished and home in a way she never had before. They stood there by the creek in the October sunshine, two people who had found each other through practical necessity and discovered something far more valuable than they had sought. Winter brought its own challenges. The temperature dropped, though nothing like the brutal winters Victoria remembered from Philadelphia. There was rain, sometimes for days on end, turning the ranch roads to mud and keeping everyone confined indoors. But the house was warm and dry, the fireplace provided good heat, and the time together as a family felt precious rather than confining. Christmas arrived, and Victoria was determined to make it special for the children. She used her seamstress skills to sew new dresses for Emma and new shirts for Thomas from fabric Matthew had bought on a trip to town. Matthew carved wooden toys, a horse for Thomas and a doll cradle for Emma. They cut a small pine tree from the hills and decorated it with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments the children made. On Christmas morning, Emma woke everyone before dawn, excited in a way Victoria had not seen since before Margaret's illness. Thomas tried to maintain his 7-year-old dignity but failed, equally thrilled by the gifts and the special breakfast Victoria had prepared. "This is the best Christmas ever," Emma announced, hugging her new doll cradle to her chest. Matthew caught Victoria's eye across the room, and she saw her own emotion reflected there, joy and sadness mixed together. Joy for the life they were building, sadness that Margaret was not here to see her children thriving. That evening, after the children were in bed, Matthew and Victoria sat together on the settee Matthew had recently purchased from a family moving back east. It was a luxury, that settee, but Matthew had wanted something nice for the house, something that reflected the fact that this was now a real home with a real family. "I have something for you," Matthew said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small wrapped package and handed it to Victoria. Inside was a locket, delicate and beautiful, engraved with tiny flowers. When she opened it, she found 2 small spaces for photographs or locks of hair. "I thought you might want to put pictures of Margaret and the children in it," Matthew said, "so you could keep them close to your heart always." Victoria felt tears spill over, moved by his thoughtfulness. "Matthew, this is too much. This must have cost a fortune." "You are worth it," he said simply. "You and the children, you are worth everything to me." She kissed him then, trying to pour into the kiss everything she felt but could not quite articulate. He responded in kind, his arms coming around her, holding her close. "I want to give you something too," Victoria said when they finally parted. "Not a thing, but information. News." "What kind of news?" Matthew asked, looking puzzled. "The kind that means we should probably add another bedroom to the house before next summer." It took him a moment to understand, and then his eyes widened. "You are with child?" "I am fairly certain, yes." "I wanted to wait until I was sure before telling you, but I am as sure as I can be without seeing a doctor." Matthew let out a whoop of joy that probably woke the children, then immediately looked sheepish. But Victoria was laughing, delighted by his unguarded happiness. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby." "Yes, due sometime in July, I think." He kissed her again, then placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "I am going to be a father," he said. A real father, not just to Thomas and Emma, though they are every bit as much mine now as any child of my blood could be, but a father from the very beginning. You are already a wonderful father to them, Victoria assured him. They love you, Matthew. They call you Papa when they think I am not listening. His eyes grew suspiciously bright. They do, they do. You have given them something precious, something I could not give them on my own. You have given them security and love and a sense of belonging. You have shown them that family is not just about blood, but about choice and commitment. Spring arrived with wildflowers carpeting the hillsides in brilliant colors. Victoria's pregnancy progressed normally, though the California heat as summer approached made her uncomfortable. Matthew was attentive to the point of being overprotective, not wanting her to work too hard, constantly worried about her and the baby. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she finally told him one afternoon when he tried to prevent her from hanging laundry. "I know, but I cannot help worrying. My mother lost 2 babies between me and my brother. I could not bear it if something happened to you or our child." His vulnerability touched her. She took his hand and placed it on her rounded belly. "Feel that. The baby is strong and active. Everything is going well." As if on cue, the baby kicked against Matthew's palm. His face lit up with wonder, and Victoria fell in love with him all over again. In late June, Matthew hired a woman from town, Mrs. Patterson, to come stay at the ranch for a few weeks to help with the birth and the household afterward. She was a motherly woman who had attended dozens of births, and who immediately took charge of preparations with cheerful efficiency. The baby came on a sweltering July afternoon, arriving after a labor that was long but not unusually difficult. Matthew paced anxiously on the porch, listening to Victoria's occasional cries with white-knuckled hands. Thomas and Emma were with the Johnsons, spared from witnessing their aunt's ordeal. When Mrs. Patterson finally emerged and told him he had a son, Matthew's knees nearly gave out with relief. "Victoria," he asked urgently, "is she well, tired but healthy? Come meet your boy." Matthew entered the bedroom to find Victoria propped against pillows, exhausted and sweaty but smiling, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with such love and pride that he felt his throat tighten. "Matthew, meet your son," she said softly. He approached carefully, almost afraid to breathe, and looked down at the red-faced infant in Victoria's arms. The baby was tiny and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and miniature fingers that curled and uncurled against the blanket. "He is beautiful," Matthew whispered. "You are beautiful. Thank you for this gift, Victoria." "We made him together," she said. "He is ours, the product of what we have built here." They named him William Michael Forrester, William after Matthew's father and Michael after Victoria's. When Thomas and Emma came home the next day and met their new cousin, they were entranced, taking turns holding him carefully under adult supervision and arguing gently about whether he looked more like Victoria or Matthew. "He is family either way," Matthew said, ruffling Thomas's hair. "Just like you two are family, just like all of us are family now." The first year of William's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and simple joys. Victoria marveled at how different it was to mother an infant when you had a true partner, someone who woke with you in the night, who walked a fussy baby so you could rest, who shared every burden and every delight. Thomas, now 8, took his role as big brother seriously, always watchful and protective. Emma, 6, loved to sing to William and make him laugh with silly faces. The children had fully settled into their life on the ranch, their grief over Margaret's death now a quiet sadness rather than an overwhelming pain. On William's first birthday, the ranch threw its first real party. The Johnsons came, along with several other neighboring families. and there was food and music and celebration. Victoria watched Matthew teaching Thomas how to play horseshoes while Emma showed off William's first attempts at walking to anyone who would watch, and felt a contentment so deep it almost frightened her. "You look thoughtful," said Mrs. Johnson, coming to stand beside Victoria on the porch. "I was just thinking about how much has changed in 2 years. When I stepped off that stage coach in Reading, I was terrified. I had no idea if I was making the right choice, if Matthew would be kind, if the children would adjust. I was prepared for struggle and hardship. And instead you found happiness. I found more than happiness. I found home. I found family. I found love I did not even know I was looking for." Victoria paused, then added, "Sometimes I feel guilty about it, about being so content when Margaret is gone. She should be here, raising her children, seeing them grow and thrive." "Margaret made sure her children would be cared for," Mrs. Johnson said gently. "She chose you to be their mother, and you have honored that choice beautifully. You have given them not just safety and food, but love and joy. I think your sister would be proud and grateful, not resentful of your happiness." The words eased something in Victoria's heart, a burden she had not fully acknowledged carrying. She thought about Margaret, about the promise she had made, and realized that she had kept it in ways she never could have imagined. She had given Emma and Thomas not just a home, but a father who adored them, a brother who completed their family, and a life full of possibility. That night, after the guests had gone and the children were in bed, Victoria and Matthew sat together on the porch as they often did, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I have been thinking," Matthew said, "about expanding the ranch. Maybe buying the Anderson property to the north when he retires next year. We could run more cattle, maybe start breeding horses. Thomas is showing real aptitude for ranch work, and in a few years, William will be old enough to start learning too." "That sounds wonderful," Victoria said. "Though I must tell you, if we are planning for the future, you should probably know that I am with child again." Matthew turned to her, eyes wide. "Again? Already? These things happen when married people share a bed," Victoria said with a smile. "Are you displeased?" "Displeased?" "Victoria, I am thrilled. Overwhelmed perhaps, but thrilled." He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Our family keeps growing. It does. And I could not be happier about it." The second baby, a daughter they named Margaret Rose, was born the following spring. Emma was ecstatic to have a sister, and Thomas took his role as eldest child with endearing seriousness, already planning how he would teach both William and Margaret to ride when they were old enough. Life settled into a rich pattern of work and love and growth. The ranch prospered under Matthew's careful management and Victoria's efficient household. They did buy the Anderson property, expanding their holdings and their herd. Thomas grew tall and capable, eventually taking on more and more ranch responsibilities. Emma developed her mother's skill with a needle and helped Victoria with sewing and with teaching Margaret as she grew. William and Margaret were born into a stable, loving home, never knowing the uncertainty and fear that Thomas and Emma had experienced as young children. But the older children's experiences had shaped them in valuable ways, making them compassionate and resilient and deeply appreciative of the family they had found. Years passed, measured in seasons and harvests, in cattle drives and Christmas celebrations, in small daily moments of connection and love. Victoria watched her children grow, Thomas becoming a young man who worked the ranch alongside his father, Emma blossoming into a beautiful and capable young woman, William and Margaret thriving under the love of parents and siblings alike. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Matthew surprised Victoria with a trip to San Francisco, their first time away from the ranch together since they had married. Mrs. Johnson agreed to watch the children, and Matthew and Victoria took the train to the city, staying in a fine hotel and dining in restaurants and walking along the waterfront like young sweethearts. "You ever regret it?" Matthew asked one evening as they watched the sun set over the bay. Answering that advertisement, marrying a stranger, leaving everything familiar behind. Victoria thought about the question seriously before answering. She thought about Philadelphia, about her life as a seamstress, about the grief and fear that had driven her westward. She thought about the ranch, about the children, about the life they had built together. "Not for a single moment," she said. "Answering your advertisement was the bravest and best thing I ever did. You have given me everything, Matthew. A home, a family, a purpose, and a love I never dreamed possible." "You gave me those things too," Matthew said. "I was existing before you came, surviving but not truly living. You and the children, you made my house a home and my life a joy. I love you more now than I did when I first realized I loved you, and I suspect I will love you even more with each passing year." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon. Two people who had found each other across distance and circumstance, and built something beautiful from practical beginnings. When they returned to the ranch, they were greeted with enthusiastic hugs from the children and stories about everything that had happened in their absence. The house was chaotic and loud and full of life, and Victoria felt her heart swell with gratitude for it all. More years passed. Thomas fell in love with the Johnson daughter, Grace, and married her in a beautiful ceremony at the church in Redding. Matthew gave him a portion of the ranch land as a wedding gift, and Thomas built a house there, starting his own family while still working closely with his father. Emma met a young lawyer in town and, after a proper courtship, married him and moved to Redding, though she visited the ranch often with her growing family. William showed even more aptitude for ranching than Thomas had, with an instinctive understanding of cattle and horses that delighted Matthew. Margaret developed a love of books and learning, and Matthew and Victoria scraped together money to send her to a teacher's college in Sacramento, proud beyond measure when she returned to teach at the school in Redding. Victoria and Matthew grew older together, their hair graying, their faces weathering further under the California sun, but their love only deepening with time. They were grandparents now, with Thomas and Grace providing 3 grandchildren and Emma and her husband adding 2 more. The ranch house that had once seemed adequately sized now bulged at the seams during family gatherings, filled with children and grandchildren and noise and laughter. On a summer evening much like the one when Victoria had first arrived in California, now some 25 years later, she and Matthew sat on the porch watching the sun set over the valley. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, supervised by their parents, and the sound of their laughter carried on the warm breeze. "You remember the day we met?" Victoria asked, her hand in Matthew's, their fingers intertwined from long habit. "I remember thinking you were the bravest woman I had ever seen," Matthew said. "Stepping off that stagecoach with 2 grieving children, facing an uncertain future with such courage." "I remember thinking you had kind eyes," Victoria said, "and being surprised when you knelt down to speak to the children at their level. That was when I first thought maybe everything would be all right." "It turned out better than all right," Matthew said. "It turned out perfect." Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder, comfortable and content. She thought about Margaret, as she often did, wondering what her sister would think of the life her children had lived, the family they had become part of. She liked to think Margaret would be pleased, that she would see how her sacrifice in choosing Victoria as guardian had led to this abundance of love and life. Thomas approached the porch, his eldest son on his shoulders, Grace holding their daughter's hand. "We are heading home for supper, but we will be back tomorrow to help with the fence repair on the north pasture." "No rush," Matthew said. "The fence can wait." After Thomas and his family left, followed shortly by Emma and hers, and William headed to the barn to finish evening chores with Margaret in town at her teaching job. Victoria and Matthew were left alone with the gathering dusk. "I have been thinking," Matthew said, "that we should write down our story, how we met, how we built this family and this life, so the grandchildren will know and their children after them." "That is a lovely idea," Victoria said, "though I am not sure I have the words to capture it all properly." "We will do it together," Matthew said, "just like we have done everything else." They sat quietly for a while longer, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, the same stars that had witnessed their first uncertain conversations on this very porch so many years ago. "I love you, Victoria Forrester," Matthew said, as he had said countless times over the years, and as he would say countless more times in the years to come. "And I love you, Matthew Forrester," Victoria replied, her heart full of gratitude for the life they had built, for the promise she had kept, and for the unexpected gift of true love found in the most unlikely of circumstances. The ranch would continue on, passed down through generations, a testament to two people who had started with nothing but need and determination and built an empire of love. Thomas and his sons would expand it further, adding more land and more cattle. Emma's children would return to visit each summer, keeping the connection strong. William would eventually take over the main house and the heart of the ranch, carrying on his father's legacy of hard work and integrity. Margaret would teach hundreds of children in Redding, shaping young minds and honoring the aunt she had been named for. But the true legacy was not the land or the cattle, or even the children and grandchildren, precious though they all were. The true legacy was the proof that family could be chosen as well as born, that love could grow in the most unexpected soil, that promises kept could lead to blessings unimagined. Victoria had stepped off a stagecoach in Redding, California, 25 years ago, terrified and grieving and determined. She had promised her dying sister that she would care for Emma and Thomas, would give them a home and a future. In keeping that promise, she had found her own future, her own home, her own great love. Matthew had placed an advertisement for a mail-order bride, lonely and practical, seeking partnership and help with his ranch. He had found a woman who would become his true partner in every sense, who would fill his house with life and love, who would stand beside him through every challenge and every joy. Together, they had created something beautiful and enduring. They had taken broken pieces and fragments of loss and fashioned them into a complete and thriving whole. They had proven that the human heart was capable of extraordinary resilience, that love came in many forms, and that happy endings were possible even after the deepest grief. As the years continued to pass, as they grew older and eventually passed the ranch fully to William's capable hands, as they watched their grandchildren grow and begin families of their own, Victoria and Matthew remained each other's greatest blessing. They had built their life on a foundation of mutual respect and shared purpose, and had discovered that such a foundation could support not just survival but genuine joy. When Matthew finally passed away at the age of 78, after a long and full life, Victoria was holding his hand just as she had held Margaret's all those years ago. But this time, there was no desperate fear, only gratitude for the decades they had shared and the certainty that she had been truly loved. "Thank you," she whispered to him as his breathing slowed. "Thank you for everything you gave me, for the life we built together." Matthew's last words were, "I love you," spoken with the same sincerity he had always brought to those three simple words. Victoria lived another 5 years after Matthew's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and even great-grandchildren, a matriarch beloved and respected. She spent her final years writing down the story Matthew had wanted recorded, filling pages with memories of their life together, of the ranch and the children and the love that had sustained them through everything. When she died peacefully in her sleep at 83, her family found the completed manuscript on her desk, tied with a ribbon. On the first page, she had written a dedication, "To Margaret, who trusted me with her children. To Matthew, who became their father and my beloved husband. To Emma, Thomas, William, and Margaret Rose, who made everything worthwhile. And to all who come after, may you know the power of promises kept and love freely given." The ranch continued on, generation after generation, each adding their own chapter to the story while honoring the foundation laid by Victoria and Matthew. The original house was preserved and expanded, the porch where so many important conversations had taken place, maintained with careful reverence. And in Redding, California, in the valley where the Sacramento River glinted silver in the sunlight and the mountains rose purple in the distance, people still told the story of the mail-order bride who came with her sister's children and the cowboy who became father to them and husband to her, and how from that practical arrangement grew a love that endured beyond death and blessed generations yet to come.